Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to do a book review. The book that I read and would like to tell you about is Sugar Money by Jane Harris. This book I received from Net Galley, and this is the first book that I've ever received from Net Galley, so it's my first review of a book that has not yet been released. The release date for Sugar Money is April 3rd, which is this coming Tuesday, and I thought I would like to get a review up of it before its release date here in the US. So this is a historical fiction novel. It's based on a true story, and it takes place in the mid 1700s, in actually the 1760s, and it takes place in the Caribbean, on a couple of islands, and it's all about the slavery and the sugarcane industry at that time. So as the story opens, our narrator is a young boy, a 12-year-old boy named Lucian, and he is a slave of some monks at a French monastery on the island of Martinique. And he has a brother who's quite a bit older, in his 20s, I believe, and they have been separated for a while. Lucian has been serving as sort of a shepherd type. He tends the cattle and the sheep and whatnot, and his brother is off doing something else. We don't know what. And it turns out that what has happened is that the French were driven off of the island of Grenada by the British a few years prior to the story starting. And as they left the island of Grenada, they fled, and they had to leave a lot of their slaves behind. Well, in the following years since that's happened, the French have set up these French monks have set up a new, or I guess they already had an outpost on Martinique, and they've sort of transferred everything over there, and they're getting started trying to rebuild with a sugar plantation on Martinique. And that's where the money comes from, basically, to fund their operation, because that's, they're not getting any help from Europe at this point, and they need these sugar plantations not only to make money, but because it's a source of making rum and all these other things, these nefarious type things that are happening. So anyway, the monks basically task Lucian and his older brother Emile with heading back to Grenada to try to convince the slaves that they left behind to escape from their new British masters and come back with the boys to Martinique and basically be in slavery to the French. And this is all sort of predicated on the idea that maybe the French monks are, going to treat them better. I guess I should say that these monks also have a hospital, and some of the slaves that had worked for them and were left behind in Grenada are trained nurses and trained staff of a hospital. And these monks would really like to have their trained slaves back to work with them in their hospital on Martinique. So off Emile, who's very not happy about this idea and certainly doesn't want his little brother Lucian tagging along, off they go. On a boat between the islands off to off to Grenada to try to convince these other slaves to run away, basically, from their British masters and come back to Martinique with them. And adventures ensue. Let's see. So that's the basic plot of this book. I really liked this book overall. I tell you that I struggled with it in the beginning because Lucian talks in a dialect that is sort of a mixture between English, French, and the early form of what we now know as Creole. And he doesn't often speak in complete sentences, and so at first it was hard for me to sort of get into the rhythm of his speech patterns and to totally understand what he was saying. Some of the words weren't what I was familiar with, and I had to really think about what he was trying to say. But once I sort of got into the flow of his dialect, I really fell into the story. And Lucian, being a 12-year-old, doesn't really understand everything that he's observing, and he doesn't understand his big brother Emile at all. He idolizes Emile, but he's also angry with him for what he perceives as his big brother's abandonment of him and then his lack of caring about him. And Emil is a sort of enigmatic figure, and because we never get any of the story from his point of view, we never really know what he's feeling at any particular time, which is interesting. Another thing is that Lucian, being young, sort of narrates everything with this humoristic point of view. He never really sees the danger of what they're doing. He sees it as an adventure. And so he isn't thinking about the bad things that might befall them for this, this mission that they've been sent out at great risk to themselves, to try to convince these other slaves to escape their British masters. And as the story goes on, the adventure ensues and lots of things happen. I mean, it's a fairly short book, I think less than 300 pages long. And it certainly does not end, there's no happy ending here. I'm just going to say that. I don't want to spoil anything, but, this is a period in history which was not pleasant. The slaves were not treated well by either the French nor the British. I mean, the French monks are trying to get these slaves to escape and come back under their control, but they're no better in the ways that they treat the slaves than the British are. So there are no good guys amongst the whites here. There are no, saviors for the slaves in amongst the white masters here. And it's all about the slaves trying to make the best of a bad situation all around. So, the story was heartbreaking at the end, but it really was interesting to read about this period in history, which I didn't know very much about, the slavery in the Caribbean and sugar plantations and all that I didn't know much about. And it was also interesting to read about slavery from a non-American perspective. This was British and French slavery, and Afro-Caribbean history that we're talking about here. There's, some discussion of the Maroons, which were the escaped slaves that had gone off and formed their own communities on these islands. So there's a lot of this history that I didn't know very much about, which I found fascinating, and I really loved seeing it from the perspective, a non-American perspective, basically. So this is a great historical fiction of a time in a place that I don't think is discussed a great deal, at least in the historical fiction that I've read in the past. So if that's something you're interested in, I would highly recommend it. It's just a good adventure story as these two boys try to complete their mission without being caught by the British. And there's some family drama involved in all of this as well. So it ticks a lot of boxes as far as the narrative goes. And not only that, the structure of it is, short chapters, so the story moves along really quickly. So it was a quick read as well. So lots of positives here. I would say I would give this probably a 4-star out of 5 if I were to rate it. And I would recommend it to anybody who likes historical fiction and would like to give it a try. I certainly will be checking out other things by this author, Jane Harris, in the future. And I'm very pleased to have been granted the opportunity to read this book a little bit ahead of its publication by Net Galley. Hope this review gives you some information about a book that you might like to pick up, and I will talk to you later.